Jim Buckley talks about campus terrorism.
We've seen it happen here in New York State and at colleges all across the country. Small bands of radicals trampling on the rights of the student majority, encouraged by administrators and politicians who cave in to their demands. We've got to restore order on our campuses so we can get on with the serious business of education.
Isn't it about time we had a senator? Buckley.
You know, everybody says, Pataki, your victory was the high point for the conservatives. To me, it was Jim Buckley in 1970, and it was something where no one thought this was possible.
What we call today Reagan Democrats came out in full force. Cops and firemen voted for Jim Buckley. Construction workers voted for Jim Buckley.
Well, the other two were giving the liberal answers to every problem that affected the American body politic. And so I was giving orthodox conservative gospel.
Look, I think it shocked the nation when we elected Jim Buckley, and here was this third party, this New York State Conservative Party. It was only formed in 1962, and here we were in 1970, and we elected our own United States Senator.
As a campaign volunteer for Jim Buckley for Senate, I really connected with Jim Buckley, and in fact, when I was finally elected to Congress in 1992, I asked him if he would swear me in.
The New York Conservative Party was formed in what we considered the belly of the beast. This was the home of Nelson Rockefeller. This was the home of the national liberal establishment. And Dan Mahoney and Kieran O'Doherty and a few brave souls decided to fight the beast right at home.
Kieran was the, how do I describe? Kieran was the barroom fighter, and Jay Daniel was the arbiter and the peacemaker afterwards, but got the deal done. But the deal would never have been opened up to be done without Kieran kicking the can.
They were motivated by principle. They were motivated by offering the people of New York an alternative. And frankly, they put their own careers in jeopardy by doing what they did.
They were elegant political autocrats. They were extraordinarily bright, politically very sophisticated. They knew what had to be done, and there was opposition here and there within the party leadership, but one way or another, they always got their way.
I think you can look back at the history of the Conservative Party of New York and say that it provided the spark that resulted by 1964 in the Goldwater nomination.
Well, it was the Barry Goldwater campaign for president that drew me to politics. So actually I got involved in the Conservative Party 2 years after it was the foundation of the party. So I was a latecomer. We organized a commando raid at midnight to go into Rockefeller headquarters, to break into Rockefeller headquarters, to steal all of the Goldwater literature that was completely stacked up to the ceiling there and not being distributed whatsoever.
When Bill Buckley ran for mayor, he demonstrated that you could get up and you could talk about ideas and you could talk about principles and you could have an impact. And I think all of that sparked conservative activity, not just in New York, but all across the country.
There was something like 200 Buckley for Mayor clubs in New York City during that race. It brought out a whole new generation of people who became conservatives and started a movement.
William F. Buckley's campaign for mayor really put the party on the map.
Our history is such that at various times we really searched around for candidates and we were always lucky. We had heard about this Vietnam War widow who lived in Larchmont, New York. After a very hospitable greeting, she said, "I hope you're not here to get me to run for assembly." And we said, no, don't worry, perish the thought, that's not what we're here for.
One great Saturday, we got a hold of a convertible, and myself and Jim Gay sitting in the back seat of the convertible, and had Barbara propped up on the convertible, and we were hanging on to her ankles so she wouldn't fall out of the car.
She went out, campaigned throughout the state of New York, and garnered close to 900,000 votes. And it really put a shock into the system.
Kathleen and Dan used to stay at our house all the time. Dan came in the door at 1:30 in the morning coming off this meeting and said to my wife, Marianne, who said, well, we have our candidate. And Marianne obviously popped up and said, well, who? He said, Al D'Amato, and of course my wife responded, Al who?
I was Al Who in 1980, the supervisor of a town running for the United States Senate. People said, this is ridiculous. Well, once the conservatives gave me their support, people got the idea, hey, guess what? You know, maybe he can win.
The conservative movement around Ronald Reagan was another major point in the electoral history of the party, because the Conservative Party was with Ronald Reagan actually as far back as 1968, and of course we were there in 1980 and gave him a margin of victory in New York State.
The 1990 election, when in fact the Conservatives decided it was not going to play ball with the Republican Party, nominated me and stood for what I regarded as the unvarnished principles associated with the party in the past.
Republicans that vote on the conservative line, I think sometimes they feel confident that they're not only voting for the candidate of their choice, but they're sending a message at the same time.
Any candidate running knows that there's a conservative party looking over his shoulder, trying to keep him honest.
Running as a Republican conservative allowed me to attract a lot of conservative Democrats and independents to vote for me, who in the past had seen no difference between Republicans and Democrats.
We put an end to Mario Cuomo's political career, and it was the Conservative Party that gave him 326,000 votes. And we were the margin of victory for him that year.
I still vividly remember a December 1993 trek to Brooklyn to go meet Chairman Mike Long. What I learned that day and what Mike and the Conservative Party represented to me over the campaign and through the intervening years was principled leadership. And it started with Mike, but it ran through the entire party organization and structure.
If you ask me, what would the state look like without the New York State Conservative Party? I'd say George Pataki, Al D'Amato, Dennis Facco, and even some young guy from Suffolk County who ran for Congress about 15 years ago would never have been in office.
I never could have or would have been a senator were it not for the conservatives.
I wouldn't have won without the Conservative Party.
The Conservative Party at that time reflected and advocated values, and that is why it effectively reached into those constituencies. I couldn't have won without that vote.
I think the party's had a great 50 years. We've really accomplished an awful lot. The election of a United States Senator, the defeat of Mario Cuomo, the election of a governor, attorney general. We've defeated the transportation bond issue. We've been the margin of victory for a number of assemblymen, congressmen, state senators. I think without, while New York is a tough state and a blue state, it'd be a hell of a lot worse state without the New York State Conservative Party.